Good morning, Napa Valley Unitarian Universalists. Welcome to our online worship service. I'm Reverend Dr. Leisa Huyck, and I'm the parish minister here. With us this morning as our celebrant is Lenore Hirsch. You are welcome in this community if you're full of wonder and hope, and you're welcome if you're full of rage and fear. You're welcome if you're seeking a peaceful sanctuary, and you're welcome if you're looking for jubilant inspiration. You're welcome if you're an introvert, you're welcome if you're an extrovert, and you're welcome if you're somewhere in the middle. You are welcome if you're surrounded by noisy family members. You're welcome if you're deeply lonely. You're welcome whatever the color of your skin, whomever you love, whatever your gender, however you make your living, and whatever the level of your income. Whoever you are and whatever you seek, you are welcome here. We're so glad to have you with us. Throughout the month of October, as a congregation, we are asking ourselves, what does it mean to be a people of deep listening? Today, we'll explore the power of words to shape our world. This may sound like we're asking, what does it mean to be a people of noisy talking? But if you listen carefully, I hope you'll find deep listening to be at the very center, the heart of the message. Listening to the people and other beings with whom we share this good earth, listening to the needs of earth itself. So let us begin this time of deep listening by centering through music.
Each Sunday, Unitarian Universalists all over the world light a chalice, the symbol of our faith. You are invited now to light your own chalice at home as I speak these words from Reverend Cynthia Landrum. Superheroes, words from Spider-Man, the Green Lantern, and the Human Torch. Mindful that with great power comes great responsibility, we light this chalice in the hopes that in brightest day, in blackest night, our faith will flame on.
To all the inspired and have no Lord.
I invite you now into a moment of receptivity and reflection as we share the joys and sorrows of this community. We make sacred the milestones of our lives when we share them with each other. We have here a bowl of water and some stones. If you have a joy or a sorrow that you would like to share with all here, you can type it into the chat, and then choose a stone to represent what you have shared. If you have a joy or sorrow that you don't need to share with everyone, just type the word stone into the chat and choose a stone to represent what you are keeping in the silence of your heart.
Before we begin sharing our joys and sorrows, let's take a moment of silence together to honor the life of John O'Gara. John died a week ago today. He was the husband of Anita Castellano O'Gara. John was a wonderful man, deeply loving. He took excellent care of his family, and he was known around his neighborhood as the go-to guy for when anything needed fixing. John will be deeply missed. Let's take a moment of silence together to honor John's life and send our loving prayers to Anita. Now, let us begin our sharing of joys and sorrows. Let us allow one of the stones in the bowl to represent all those joys and sorrows that are too tender to share. Now, let's go deeper. I invite you to get comfortable in your seat and assume a posture of both relaxation and attention. Allow yourself to feel how you're held by your chair or sofa, and how your chair or sofa is held by the floor, and then how the floor is held by the earth. In every moment, you are held by earth. Now receive a breath in and then out. I am here. Receive a second breath in and then out. You are there. A third breath in and then out. We are together. Now, hear these words. Spirit of life, source of all change. Now is the time in the early autumn when fog fills the valley in the mornings before the sun's warmth burns it away. Leaves begin to turn colors, hanging like bright flags against the clear autumnal blue of the sky. We hear geese calling and look up and see them flying in a V. The goose people teach us several lessons that we may need to remember right about now. Geese fly in V's so that the goose ahead lessens the resistance for the goose behind. Geese can fly 71% further in community than alone. The geese in the back honk to encourage the geese toward the front to keep flying and keep up their speed. If a goose gets sick or hurt and can't keep up, it goes to ground. 2 other geese go with it and stay with it until it dies or recovers. Not 1 goose, but 2. So every goose always has a companion. Then they either try to catch up with their flock or join another formation. 1 goose flies in the lead at the point of the V only until it begins to feel the slightest fatigue. At that point, it drops back to a different position, and another goose takes over the lead. If the first lead goose waited until it was exhausted to drop back, it would not be able to keep up with the rest of the flock. It would have to go to ground with 2 others. This would cost the geese time and possibly result in unnecessary deaths. Evolution has produced a system in which the goose drops back well before it is exhausted. May we remember these lessons imparted to us by the goose people. May we remember that we are stronger together than we are alone. May we remember to keep each other company in times of pain and struggle. May we encourage each other all along the journey. May we remember that resting is not quitting. Resting is contributing to the well-being of the whole community. May we listen deeply to the wisdom of our bodies. May we rest before we are too weary to carry on. May it be so. Amen.
Breathe
We have two readings for you this morning. The first is from the Hebrew Bible, the book of Genesis, chapter 1, verses 1 to 5. In a beginning, when God created the heavens and the earth was a formless void, and darkness covered the face of the deep, while the breath of God hovered over the face of the waters. Then God said, "Let there be light," and there was light. And God saw that the light was good, and God separated the light from the darkness. God called the light day, and the darkness he called night. And there was evening, and there was morning, the first day. Our second reading is from Reverend Barbara Kaufmann. Yes, words can kill. Wonderful things, ugly things, soar, plunge, sting, cripple, crash, cost nothing, cost everything, free or make captive. Paint dreams or sculpt sorrow, reflections of minds, glyphs of power, committed to paper, become the concrete, lay the foundation, build a life or bury a soul. Lift and ascend like wings, or slice, slash with gleaming edge, lay open a wound, stab tender heart, kill, grasp the stars, cross a continent, sink a ship, start a war, or save a life. Words, raw tissue, bones of experience, they are perfect, or perfectly lethal.
Imagine that it's 100 years from now. People are looking back on our time with awe because within a very short time span, the United States threw off incipient fascism and made a just transition to a sustainable, steady-state economy that provides for everyone's needs, including healthcare and education. Clean and safe food, water, and air are taken for granted by all. Climate change was addressed, and while the effects of decades of neglect are still being felt, atmospheric CO2 is declining at a healthy rate and is soon expected to stabilize at about 300 parts per million. Thousands of wildlife species have rebounded from the point of near extinction. The government has made reparations to Indigenous and African Americans. Instead of a criminal justice system, there is now a restorative justice system. Healthcare takes care of the whole person, not just body parts. Schools are safe places where children, all children, are valued and given what they need to develop their own particular gifts. American society celebrates diversity of all kinds and welcomes the gifts that immigrants bring. Women and men are paid the same for the same work. Everyone has 8 paid weeks of vacation and abundant family leave for taking care of new babies and ailing elders. The divorce rate has declined to less than 10%, and happy families abound. There are still problems because human beings are still human beings, but when most people argue, they do it respectfully because they were taught how in every year of their education. And when they argue, it's not about things like whether to provide health care for all, but whether doctors should make house calls or expect everyone to come to the office. The teens of the future are given the assignment of researching how all this happened. How did the progressive agenda finally take hold after decades of increasingly bitter polarization? The teens go to the historical video archives and watch interviews with some of the people who helped make it happen. It started with the coronavirus pandemic of 2020, says Al Lilleberg, who was interviewed at the age of 105. It ripped away the veil covering the vast inequality between rich and poor, between whites and people of color. The only option was change. When pressed for details about how that change happened, Lilleberg said, "We cast the right spells," and then smiled a mysterious smile. If you could cast a spell to save the world, what would that spell be? What words would you say? As African-American minister and activist Levon Briggs writes, words are spells, and every time we repeat those phrases, we are affirming that in the world. Words create worlds. We have the communal power and creative genius to create new worlds. Humans have known for thousands of years that, as sociologist John Searle put it, language is constitutive of reality. Searle was referring to institutional reality, the kind of social reality that human beings create amongst ourselves, like governments and schools and birthday parties and grocery stores and religions and pay scales and unions and corporations. Using language, we create the rules by which we interact with each other, the moral code by which we agree to live. We say why institutions exist and how we are to behave in them. Without language, none of this would be possible. So it might seem like kind of a no-brainer to say that language is constitutive of reality. Duh, Mr. Sociologist. But there's a subtlety here that's important, because the kind of language we use makes a huge difference in what kinds of institutions we create. Linguists say we use cognitive frames to construct the realities we live in, to understand what's happening, to decide how to respond. Here's an example from the work of media consultant Fred Garcia. 2 different groups from the same town were told that crime was rising in their community, and they needed to come up with a solution. One group was told that crime was a wild beast on the rampage. The other was told that crime was a virus that needed to be stamped out. Both groups were given the same statistics about crime in their community. The same number of robberies, the same number of murders, the same numbers of assaults. What were the solutions that each group came up with? The group that understood crime through the frame of wild beast said they needed to build more prisons. But the group that understood crime through the frame of virus said the community needed to build more schools. When you have a virus, you see, you go looking for the causes, where the virus comes from. They looked for the cause and found poverty. They looked for a remedy for poverty and found that to be education. So they proposed building more schools. You see how the frame we operate in affects the decisions we make, how the language we use affects outcomes, how powerful words are. Now, even though Searle was speaking only of social reality, we know that our social reality is embedded in a larger physical reality, in ecological reality. We use language to define our relationships with that larger reality. We may define soil and trees and water and animals as sacred, to be respected and valued in their own right. We may say they're part of an interdependent community of life upon which we are completely dependent. Or we may define them as resources to be used for the benefit of humankind, as raw materials for economic growth or dumping grounds for pollution. The way we define them tells us how to treat them. And because this is, in fact, an interdependent universe, the way we treat them comes back and affects us. When we treat the atmosphere as a dumping ground and release trillions of tons of carbon dioxide into it, this traps heat and causes the earth to warm, which in our region results in massive wildfires, and in other regions, flooding. So not only is language constitutive of social reality, but it also greatly affects our physical, ecological reality. Speech shapes our world. Like many tribal peoples, the ancient Hebrews certainly understood the power of words to create the world. And God said, "Let there be light," and there was light. The deity speaks the world into being. Indigenous peoples the world over believe that words and stories have sacred power, so that human beings must be careful in the way we use them. The late Native American activist Paula Gunn Allen explains, tribal people say the words are sacred. We don't mean you're supposed to kneel down and worship them. We mean that you should, in your being, recognize that when you speak, your utterance has consequences inwardly and outwardly, and that you are accountable for those consequences. You can't just say anything that comes into your head and then get distressed if another person acts on it. Now, that other person may have misunderstood you, which means that they have a responsibility to find out exactly what you mean before they act, but the principle is still there. Without linguistic honor, there can be no community. There can be no ethic. There can be no love. There can be no creative vision. There can be no peace, and there can be no relationship. The Buddha spoke of speech as being an important part of the dependent chain of causation, or how what happens next is contingent on what happened before, going all the way back to the cognitive frame that forms people's thoughts. The Buddha called this cognitive frame view. The first step on the Eightfold Path to ending all suffering involves right view, which means breaking out of one's cognitive frame to see what that frame is and changing it if necessary. The second step is practicing right thought so that our thoughts don't lead to irresponsible speech. The third step is practicing right speech so that our speech does not do harm or lead to harmful action. Right speech, according to Buddhist scholar David Loy, means we abstain from false speech, especially not telling deliberate lies and not speaking deceitfully. Abstain from slanderous speech and not use words maliciously against others. Abstain from harsh words that offend or hurt others, and abstain from idle chatter that lacks purpose or depth. Positively phrased, Loy says, this means to tell the truth, to speak kindly, warmly, and gently, and to talk only when necessary. Can you imagine how many more marriages would survive if everyone practiced right speech? How many more children would grow up well-adjusted? Did you know that in a marriage or family, a negative comment or criticism has 5 times the emotional impact than a positive one or praise does? So you have to say 5 positive things to your partner for every negative one in order for the relationship to thrive. If the ratio goes down to even 4 to 1, people perceive their relationships as being unhappy. And here's an interesting thing. In the workplace, supervisors need to say only 4 positive things for every negative thing in order for employees to feel valued by their boss. So apparently, the things we say to those closest to us have more impact than the things we say to people at work. But it's still a pretty high ratio. Negative comments about us have an enormous emotional impact. This is why bullying is so devastating. It is consistent bombardment with cruel, unkind words. And as obligatory social mammals, human beings need positive connection in order to flourish. If all we get and know is cruelty, we're not likely to do well. This is borne out by the data on teen suicide. Both victims and perpetrators of bullying are at greater risk of suicide than other teens. Victims and perpetrators. Well, when it comes to what's happening in these times, it should be obvious by now that if you can set up and control people's cognitive frames, you set the terms of the national conversation. So who's controlling those frames and how? And how can we change it? George Lakoff, a linguist at UC Berkeley, has written several books about framing and about the differences between the frames of conservatives and the frames of liberals or progressives. He explains that a frame evokes a moral structure that's embedded in a larger mythopoetic structure, a theology. Remember how Rebecca Parker defines theology as a framework of meaning for habitation by human communities? The conservative frame is rooted in a fundamentalist, literal interpretation of the Bible. It's predicated on a strict dominance hierarchy of God over man, men over women, parents over children, and humans over other animals and the rest of nature. Strength is its primary virtue. The strong father who works hard to support his family and becomes very wealthy is the most moral person. Money is the reward for virtue. Taxation is bad because it punishes moral people. The liberal frame is rooted in the liberal metaphorical interpretation of the Bible. It is added to by teachings from many world religions as well as the sciences. Sound familiar? It is predicated on an interdependent web of relationships between nature and humans. Empathy is its primary virtue. The nurturing parent who raises their children to care about the well-being of others is the most moral person. Happiness is the reward for moral virtue. Taxation is good because it is the way we invest in the shared infrastructure that makes possible well-being for all. Lakoff further explains that since the 1970s, conservatives have invested billions of dollars in think tanks that develop linguistic frames for political issues with catchphrases that evoke the whole frame, like the phrase illegal alien or partial birth abortion, which respectively call up the conservative frame on immigration policy or abortion rights. These frames and phrases are then disseminated through a vast network of politicians and media outlets and repeated so incessantly on purpose that they become embedded in the national consciousness. And then supposedly neutral news outlets use those frames and phrases as a matter of course, and liberals react to them with anger and repeat them some more. But any repetition of the frame reinforces it, even a negative one. One of Lakoff's most famous titles from several years back, which you may remember, was "Don't Think of an Elephant." So what I want to know is, what if we stopped reacting to the conservative frame and started promoting our own frame? What if we started using our words to cast spells of hope and love? Because here's the thing, as I've explained before, it is a fact that strict dominance hierarchies always fail. They always collapse and die. Why? Because the dominant person or group does not listen to the needs of the people or systems they dominate. For a living system of any kind to sustain itself, the whole has to care for the parts, listening to their needs, and the parts have to care for the whole, listening for its needs. Listening to the needs of others turns out to be the key to life for ourselves. So choosing between the liberal frame for governing our nation and the conservative one isn't merely a matter of personal preference, it's a matter of life or death. What's more, the traditional American values of life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness are liberal values rooted in liberal religion. Lakoff says that if liberals can learn how to connect the issues of our time to our religious values, we can develop much more powerful frames and phrases than the fundamentalist ones. We have a couple, like the 99%, but we need more, and this will take some doing. It'll take some thinking. So what if we invest in think tanks to help us do it? And in the meantime, what if we go ahead and start casting our own spells? What if we focus less on resistance and more on regeneration? Less on how bad things are and more on the world we want to create. Let's start describing our new society in vivid detail. Let's talk about it as if it is already beginning. Let's adopt specific plans. They already exist, so let's put them into action. Let's get our words out there and let them work. Let them work their magic. When those teens 100 years from now do their research, I want them to discover how crucial our liberal religion was to the change that began sweeping the nation in 2020. I want them to learn how creatively and imaginatively we responded to the call of love. I want them to find out that words are indeed spells and that choosing how to use them is choosing between life and death. If what Levon Briggs says is true, and I believe it is, that words create worlds, and we have the communal power and creative genius to create new worlds, let us take up our power and use our genius. Let us create a world that is beautiful and just for all. Let us choose life. May it be so. Blessed be.
Love is the spirit of this church and service its law. This is our great covenant, to dwell together in peace, to seek the truth in love, and to help one another. This congregation depends entirely upon the generosity of its members and friends. All that we give in time, talent, and treasure is what sustains this community and makes it not just a sanctuary for us to return to for spiritual nourishment, but an oasis from which we can go out into the world carrying the waters of life. You can donate now by going to the link that is in the chat or going to our website at nvuu.org and clicking on the donate button. Or you can send us a check at NVUU 1625 Salvador Avenue, Napa, California 94558. The offering will now be gratefully received.
Thank you for all you give and all you do. Your gifts of time, talent, and treasure help make it possible to build the beloved community not only in this congregation, but also in the region beyond. Now I want to especially thank Brian Shaw for his music and for producing the video for this morning's service. And I want to thank Lenore Hirsch for being our celebrant and doing such a wonderful job. I want to make sure that you know that we have a Zoom social hour every Sunday after our service, or even when we visit other congregations, we still meet at about noon on Zoom for social time together. And that's really important to building the community we hope to be part of here. Now for our closing words, I offer you this prayerful reflection. Spirit of life, source of all language, help us understand how great is our power. We have the power to speak love into being, to speak sharing and caring and joy. We also have the power to speak hate into being, to speak fear and loathing and violence. May we accept our power. May we take responsibility for what we speak and how. May we ever speak with love. May we speak the world we dream of into being. Blessed be. Now, please rise in body or spirit to sing our closing song, One More Step. It's number 168 in the hymnal, number 168. One more step.
One till every soul is sung by everyone will sing one more song.
We extinguish our chalice, but not the light of truth, the warmth of love, or the fire of commitment. These we carry in our hearts out into the world until we meet again. And now, people of this beloved community, you have the power to speak a new world into being. Accept your power, speak with love, and go shining. Blessed be.